Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're watching a special edition of The Listening Post. The late Molly Ivins, a syndicated columnist based in Texas, once wrote that satire is the weapon of the powerless against the powerful. In essence, she was saying that if you can't beat them and you don't want to join them, mock them. Traditionally, there's been a relationship between journalists and satirists. The former report the news, the latter provide the added edge. And satire does have a way of cutting to the core of an issue, deflating egos and exposing hypocrisy, which is why egotistical leaders given to hypocrisy sometimes fail to see the humor. Political satirists have been doing their thing for centuries, starting with cartoons. But in this electronic age, there's been a shift. With all the news outlets now available, 24-hour channels offering less news and more opinion, more and more satirists have turned their attention to the news media, because the media, like other societal institutions, are just another form of power that needs to be held to account. In this three-part special, we look at the role that satire is playing in media around the world and the consequences that can have for the satirist, which, like the points they make, can be very serious indeed.
One resounding...
They are the traditional voices of TV authorities.
Not answering the question of whether you threatened to overrule.
The faces of the news.
The
The purveyors of serious journalism.
Tomorrow begins our Saturday night coverage with the president's turn.
But conventional, mainstream journalists don't hold the monopoly on the news anymore. The satirists are telling it like it is. From his world news headquarters in New York is late-night current affairs comic Jon Stewart. In Cairo, there was Bassem Youssef, who made Egyptian TV history with his show Al Barnameg. Spanish TV comic Gran Wyoming, that's not his real name of course, hosts El Intermedio from his studios in Madrid.
The Queen of the Dragon.
And then there's the comedy vanguard, advancing online. Next Media Animation based in Taiwan. Rap News in Australia, and in Thailand it's Jiao Khao Tuen, or Shallow News in Depth, which kind of says it all.
Satire is subverting the message. Satire is showing the hypocrisy of somebody saying something today when you know that they said something different yesterday. And satire is one of the most effective ways of communicating those discrepancies.
In Egypt, that person was Bassem Youssef, who also got his start online. As hundreds of thousands of protesters converged on Tahrir Square, Youssef took to the web, providing an alternative narrative, a comedic one, on the story. Youssef was so popular he made it onto mainstream media. There, he ran afoul first of the Morsi government, which landed him in court. Then, when it became obvious the interim government, run by General Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, would be elected, he pulled the plug on the show and hasn't been seen on air since.
He was used as a tool to make fun of the Muslim Brotherhood and to make fun of deposed President Morsi. And obviously that was something which was needed at that time. Now, once his function has been performed and his role ended, oh, okay, now we want to get rid of him. We don't want him to criticize the military or President Sisi.
Just the very fact that Bassem Youssef was willing to make jokes about General Sisi, to make jokes about this cult of personality, the chocolates and truffles with Sisi's face, this widespread, almost cultish support for a military leader. This was actually quite bold, and much bolder than some on the left who were criticizing Youssef were willing to give him credit for.
Whatever you do as a satirist, people will accuse you of double standards. That we just know is a fact of life. Everyone's got their own different line, and there's all these different lines, and you as a satirist are supposed to not cross that line. I just say forget about it. That's what we satirists do all over the world. We just forget about those lines if we can, and sometimes it's scary, and we just try and cross all of them.
Bassem Youssef belonged to a growing number of satirists who have appropriated the news format for comedic effect. Many have been inspired by Jon Stewart in the US, who wasn't the first satirist to pose as a news anchor, he's just one of the best known. Initially, Washington's polarized politics were the focus of Stewart's attention, but with the growth of the television news industry, particularly 24-hour TV news, he started turning his sights more and more on those channels, and they have provided him with plenty of material. News channels have always struggled to fill airtime and feel relevant on slow news days. And that was before the internet came along and destroyed what was left of the news industry's economic model. Budgets have been slashed and 24-hour news channels still have all that airtime to fill. That means less journalism, fewer investigations, and a lot more talk from opinionated hosts.
You're an unbelievably stupid man, aren't you?
Belligerent pundits. And reporters who are constantly called on for updates, even if there's no news to actually report.
Yeah, we think that there'll be some sort of announcement in the next few minutes, whatever that is.
Which leaves satirists with plenty to say.
And now in a desperate attempt to fill 24 hours of programming, here's some happened somewhere today.
The 24-hour news cycle has paved the way for a whole new generation of satirists, mostly making fun of the daily news. You have news anchors on CNN, Fox News, all the time talking.
Are you a stripper, an escort, or just a young hottie impressed by an arrogant, entitled governor of Texas?
And when you're filling up 24 hours of airtime, you're ending up saying ridiculous stuff.
Well, I don't know how something like that qualifies as a question on national TV.
Yusuf and Stewart both, in different ways, owe their careers and their popularity to the breakup of the old mainstream media paradigm. Stewart owes his to the fact that cable television was aching for content and would put almost anything on because they had so much space at the time when Stewart was able to come onto The Daily Show. Yusuf was able to appropriate YouTube. And both of those technologies allowed them to go around the old gatekeepers of the mainstream media.
What Bassem Youssef was doing was something that was very familiar to an American audience, but something Egyptian audience has never seen, which is a satirist telling hard truths, which is cutting up the day's news and replaying it for us to laugh at. And by that same token, he was serving as this kind of risk taker that Egypt really didn't have.
Risk is part of a comedian's repertoire. Jonathan Shapiro is a prominent South African cartoonist writing under the pen name Zipiro. In 2008, he was sued by President Jacob Zuma for a cartoon that depicted Zuma preparing to rape Lady Justice. Zipiro called it a metaphor for the abuse of justice that allowed the politician to take office. The president said it was humiliating and degrading. The insinuation is that it was a reference to rape charges that he had been acquitted of 2 years before.
Within a fairly short while, he sued. And that case went on for 4 years and came very close to going to court. And it was only about a day or two before it was due in court that he dropped it. The reason he dropped it, well, they put out some statement saying that, he was doing it for the benefit of freedom of expression or something, which was an absolute nonsense.
So, sure, we might say that this circumstance of drawing or making a joke about rape could be not so family-friendly, but in these kind of circumstances where you have a president who's been accused of a variety of things, including actual rape charges, that's what a cartoonist can do that, quite simply, a journalist can't do.
Those who hold power often fear satirists more than they do journalists, because satirists play by a different set of rules. They are unconstrained. They have no need to be objective. There's no requirement to strike an editorial balance when it comes to satirical cartoons or fake newscasts.
Governments know at the end of the day that although satire is funny and humorous, satirists can become very effective, and in some cases they have very huge followings. People start to listen to them, and in many cases people are affected by what these satirists are saying.
The challenge for a government that's being satirized is how to respond to that. In a freer society, satire acts kind of like a safety valve. It lets people let off steam. And for the government to let that happen generally allows them to continue to exist in a way that promulgates their power. When governments overreact to satire, there's really a problem. And we've all seen someone who doesn't take a joke well.
We've reached a stage where a satirical show which was meant to collect news and critique it has become a primary source of information. People actually find out about things because of us. What does this tell you about the state of the news today? It says that news has become more and more banal.
We are reeling from a wave of indignation in Spain, not just for what's happening, but also for the way in which some outlets want to tell us what's happening. We use humour. It gives you a poetic license which traditional journalism doesn't grant.
Traditional media have been controlled so much by the powers that be that journalists have slipped through the cracks and created their own ways of life.
When Spaniards sit down to watch the evening news, they've plenty of channels nationwide to choose from. The state's Radio Televisión Española and 4 private broadcasters. But many find it hard to take news from any of them at face value, so they're switching over to watch a comedian turned pseudo-news anchor instead.
El dinero negro en el Partido Popular es como las películas de Rocky. Cuando crees que ya no puede haber más, Sylvester Stallone se pone votos y te cuela otra saga.
El Intermedio, the interval, has struck a chord. Satire with substance.
Para hablar de economía es muy importante cuidar el envoltorio. Así, con muchos datos irrelevantes en pantalla. Vamos a ver, eso es.
Puncturing headlines, confronting power, asking the right questions.
Estamos sorprendidos porque esto es...
We're surprised by the success of this show because it's a sign of the low quality of news in this country.
Kapuscinski, por ejemplo...
The Polish journalist Richard Kapuscinski once said that journalism is everything that irritates power and that all the rest is propaganda. We're definitely in the propaganda phase in Spain. So on this show, we're committed to denouncing it. Because today there's no real investigative journalism, and we don't get to the bottom of big stories like the corruption scandals the way we should.
Como se debería, pues la corrupción.
But investigative journalism takes time and costs money. And these days, news editors just don't have the budgets. Their problems are not just economic, though. Mainstream journalists have their reasons for going light on stories about corruption and austerity. When Mariano Rajoy's conservative government came to power in 2011, a purge of state-owned TV followed. A trail of Spain's most critical journalists were fired, and friendlier ones were hired. This year, 3 editors of the top Spanish dailies were shown the door. The move came after 2 of those papers, El País and El Mundo, exposed one of the biggest corruption scandals in Spanish history, implicating Rajoy's government last year. The crisis in the media has driven viewers to alternative sources of news and analysis. El Intermedio has some 2.5 million viewers daily. But despite the ratings, many say the show's always one joke away from being taken off air.
Es el hombre del momento en Estados Unidos. The man of the hour, Mariano Amazing Rajoy.
At a time when Spain's public has lost a lot of faith in its key institutions, judicial, economic, political, even the monarchy, it's the media's duty to hold those institutions to account. But for Spain's mainstream press, being that reliable watchdog is proving to be a challenge, because that crisis of credibility extends all the way to their doorstep.
So the job of taking critical distance has fallen on Satire. Mongolia is a magazine that was set up in 2012 by a group of disaffected journalists. Since then, it's been drawing in readers with its mix of cartoon strips, spoof letters to the editor, and eye-catching front pages, all taking aim at Spain's most revered institutions.
We weren't sure whether this format was going to work or not, but we thought it was one of the only paths left to be explored to make a direct critique of a system which hasn't really managed a true transition to democracy. Cosmetically it is, but its cultural DNA is not. So we said, okay, let's try and force that change through humor, and also by doing very serious journalism.
Every month, the magazine sets aside a few complimentary copies to send to politicians, princes, kings, bankers, editors, and corporate types, the targets of their jokes. The royal house always receives a copy, often adorned with post-it notes highlighting where they can find the latest jokes about them. earlier this year, when the former king's daughter Christina faced court charges in a corruption case, a special issue of the magazine hit the newsstands.
We published a front-page headline Mong Hola, a parody of the magazine Hola, which is the equivalent of the international Hello, in which Christina was showing us her new home, a prison cell. We were poking fun at those types of publications that offer nothing and are completely out of touch.
But like all good satire, Mongolia has serious intent. Its journalism can hit hard. Reports on the business dealings of José María Aznar, the former Spanish Prime Minister, how politicians profited from the privatization of state-owned companies, Spain's involvement in the Iraq War. And to the surprise of its backers, circulation has reached more than 40,000. The magazine now makes enough money to pay regular salaries to its staff, and all that with no advertising as a source of revenue.
Media like us, like El Diario.es and La Marea, we're all proving that with very little you can achieve a lot, and that perhaps one of the biggest mistakes have been to allow the media to grow so much that they've turned into institutions that need huge resources, and this makes them very slow machines. We're following the guerrilla war model of Che Guevara. We've created focal points that generate information which is more direct, more effective, more independent, more real.
Because in times of financial crisis, Spaniards are struggling to take the mainstream news seriously. So they've gone looking for the truth elsewhere.
Oh yeah, all right, rock and roll!
In parody, and therein lies the irony.
They have been known to incite protest, rally the masses, even help bring down dictators. The editorial cartoon, the painting of a political picture in broad brushstrokes, can be funny, but the subject matter often is not.
The political cartoon is an immediate opinion. Of course, we have people who write opinions in newspapers, but you've got to wade through a couple of thousands of words. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, I'm not sure if that's true, but you know, that is the thing, that a cartoon can hit you smack in the eye like that. When you open the paper, there it is.
Cartooning is about illustration, very much. It's about visualizing, it's about getting to grips with the, this flood of imagery we get more and more these days. I start here and I think about what's going on, what I've been hearing on the news, what's current. It's entirely down to me to decide, and the difficult thing is to try and think of a way to do a cartoon around it.
Meet The Guardian's Steve Bell and his Sunday Times counterpart, Gerald Scarfe. Combined, these two satirists have produced almost 100 years of cartoons, drawing controversy, using the power of the pen to expose both the politicians and the politics of the day. Are they on the same page? Not literally, but they're often on the same topic.
I work on the Sunday Times. That's really only once a week that I have to be thinking about a political idea. I only really have one crack a week at, whereas Steve has, you know, 3 or 4 goes at something. He does a lot more work than me and he puts in a lot more hours, but he has more of a palette to work from at the end of the week. Many of the ideas have been done by my compatriots, so I've got to think again. By the time it gets to Thursday or Friday, I should have something kind of bubbling away in my mind, and when an idea comes to me, I just sort of plunge it onto the paper immediately.
My approach is very different to Scarfe's. Everything he does is about that size. He stands at the table and hurls the think about. Me, I'm like this. Everything I do is about that size, and it's much more tightly controlled. Because what I do, I'm a comic artist. I do comic strips essentially, and even the bigger cartoons are actually just like a bigger frame of a comic strip. There's a completely different aesthetic going on. Also, I have far more slots. I have 8 a week. He has 1. The thing about drawing cartoons in paper, it's actually a very simple process. It's me. I do it, and I send it in, and it goes in the paper. Obviously, there is editorial mediation. If I do something naughty or use too many bad words, or there might be a problem with libel.
An apology and a rap on the knuckles might be the only repercussion for cartoonists working in some countries, but in others, cartoons can be explosive. You don't even need to be the one drawing them. Earlier this year, 2 Libyan politicians were facing the death penalty for using a cartoon in their election campaign deemed insulting to Islam. Their sentences were commuted, both were fined. Back in August 2011, Syrian cartoonist Ali Fazat didn't get off so lightly. He was victimized for satirizing Bashar al-Assad, an attack that was as vicious as it was symbolic. His hands broken, his pen silenced. Other cartoonists, even those not working in oppressive circumstances, have received death threats, lawsuits, jail sentences for leaving their mark. And that's because people in positions of privilege understand and fear the potent mix of power and punditry that flows from the cartoonist's pen.
If you can make a world leader look ridiculous, then that's much more powerful to use humour to bring them down than to show them with sort of dripping fangs of blood. It belittles them more. To be laughed at is probably one of the most deflating things. If you think that a person is a tyrant and you're frightened of them and they instill that fear in you, then they are still powerful. But if you make them look like a buffoon, then power evaporates.
Satirically, holding power to account has a lot of history. British newspaper cartooning seems to be the preserve of a group of men in middle to late age, surrounded by stacks of paintbrushes and pen pots, rather than laptops and tablets. When these men finally put down their pens, will there be a new generation of political cartoonists waiting to pick up where they left off?
It's quite a sort of weird and obscure and rare skill. Not many people want to do it, actually. But there are some really good people coming up, young people, young cartoonists, younger than me anyway.
Let's hope that there'll be newspapers for them to work in. I think the death of newspapers probably is threatening to cartoonists. When you think I'm in a newspaper and I'm fighting against headlines, I'm fighting against advertisements, fighting against brilliant photographs, it's my job really to try and capture the reader as he turns the page and arrest their attention and try and make my point as quickly and hard as, and simply as I can.
It's told as if a tale whereby newspapers are dying. I think that's overplayed. There will always be a need to have something in your hand to look through, to read, to laugh at, to pore over, which you can't do with a screen, you can't do with a tablet.
And that is one thing, maybe the one thing, that newspapers still have over other media. The cartoon, that in a single image and a very few words can say it all.
And finally, the thing about online satire is that although it can find its way to you, usually you have to find it, and not all of it is good. So here's a sample of some of our favorites. We mentioned Rap News earlier, produced by Juice Media in Australia. Their in-house anchorman, Robert Foster, makes salient points on politics and media that almost always rhyme. There's also Next Media, based in Taiwan. It produces CGI animated videos based on contemporary news stories. Originally produced only in Mandarin, it's since branched out into English and Japanese. We've used Mark Fiore's work on our program before. He's a San Francisco-based political cartoonist. He specializes in flash animation. He gave up print for moving images and was awarded a Pulitzer Prize in 2010. And Karabish is based in Amman, Jordan. We first noticed their work during the Arab Spring, and some of their cartoons now find audiences across the Arab world and rack up millions of views. So we'll leave you now with some of the sharpest minds in political satire, all of them doing the bulk of their work on the web. And we'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Turn off the rest. Tune in to the best of the best. I'm Brian Washington, one of the vets of this nation's press. The time is 6. Switch on your television sets to get your daily fix of headlines right here on MSNBS.
香港以基本法作为治国准则。1990年，中国通过香港基本法，并应允所通过之各项原则，例如保留香港一国两制的民主制度。
From the budgets of the Pentagon to the shores of Tripoli, we stock the world's battles in the air, on land and sea.